Now, when I was in the civil service, whenever you had a meeting with the Secretary of State, or Minister as it was then, always there was a staff inspector. And this minister would have no view about education whatsoever. That was not his business. He would always defer to the professional judgment of HI. Now, once you've got that power, don't forget, academies, free schools, are directly contracted to the Secretary of State, not to the government, to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State now can say, this is what you're going to teach in that school, that's what you're going to teach. Never been before in Europe, apart from Germany in the 1930s. That is the power. Very, very difficult. Once at the centre, you've got that power to be able for them to get rid of it, or hand it over, or to devolve it. So I think it's a very, very important one. So all one can do is argue. What I have found disappointing, I have to say, is where is the argument, strong argument, coming from University Council for Education and Teaching? I've not seen it. I had a meeting in Oxford with the present director of the department, one before her, so I'm now 3 removed, with Harry Judd, who was before me. He's a 4th-generation directors, you know, and we're arguing. You've really now got to justify, you know, the education as a distinctive way of thinking about it, and argue that in the university, argue that broadly, and to politicians, and be seeing them and so on. I mean, I don't see anything other than that strong kind of lobbying. And that's a very, very weak answer to your question. But I think it's something which one has really got to be thinking very carefully. But I'm not seeing the kind of arguments really coming out. I really am not. Right, okay. Oh. Yes. Right. I don't know, but we see one of the things, you take the 1988 Education Act, where for the first time we had a national curriculum. Now, the national curriculum set out 10 areas that was part of what they saw as a general education program. Whereas before, lots of schools had things like cookery, and I know going back, you know, that was for the girls, it was very gender-based at that time, but nonetheless it was that. Every school would have carpentry, woodwork, often metalwork. There'd be actual, in all comprehensive schools and in grammar school, there would be that practical engagement in which these activities, doing and making useful, you know, things, that was actually part of it. When it came to the national curriculum, they had to squeeze everything into these 10 categories. And so they shoved all that into a thing called art and design. Very much dominated by information technology, computers and whatnot. And I remember one comprehensive school, I was down in Leicester at the time, one comprehensive school out in, you know, the Devon Moors, which for generations had educated the boys and girls going into farming. That's all there was around there. And once again, very sexist, but you know, the girls would at least leave that school knowing how to make shepherd's pie, how to make apple pie, you know, they'd really come with knowledge about them so that they could feed their farmer husband as well. Of course, it was almost a riot once when parents came along. Instead of seeing all these lovely apple pies, they saw instead computer designed boxes in which to put apple pies. And, you know, it was all about design on a computer and planning. And what happened, a lot of that practically, we go up to Ilkley, where there was a terrific training college for home economics teachers, no longer exists. Goldsmiths College had the best centre for training woodwork teachers and metalwork teachers in the country. Closed down those departments. So we got rid of that tradition. And instead, what we said is, we've got these 10 areas, and we've got to hang an assessment system. And how do you manage to assess, you know, validly one another? Well, you have to write essays and things like that. So instead of practically engaged in doing and making, you'd have to write about doing and making. When we developed the General National Vocational Qualification, one many qualification which came and went, and so on, the reason why it was available was there to engage people more practically in doing things. But in order to do well in it, you had to write essays. And therefore, more people failed out than would have done if they'd done the general certificate of education. And so we've got an assessment system that militates against doing and making and that practical thing. Moreover, we've got a notion of practical engagement is often referred to as vocational education. And that in this country, has not got parity esteem with the so-called academic. It's deeply rooted in the culture of this country, even though some of our greatest minds have been practical people. People like Lord Nuffield, for example, who started off at the age of 13 when he left school, never having taken any exam, mending bicycles in Oxford, then making bicycles, then making cars, the Morris motor car, became the richest man in England, wasn't allowed to join the local golf club. Why? Despite that he was a genius, brilliant, he was in trade. All right? It didn't matter, he just bought the golf club. But I mean, this idea, this whole tradition in this country against seeing practical learning as just as demanding and just as rigorous as the so-called, that is something which we've really got to overcome. That's what Kenneth Baker is trying to do with his things on engineering and so on. So there's a cultural thing, there's an assessment one. And I think that we've got to, this whole education is really bringing lots of different people together to say, let's have this wider vision